What's up, Internet? I'm Mario,
And I'm Nick.
and you're watching Rocket.
To the cloud.
Sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine running. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past.
Welcome to the very first episode of Rocket to the Cloud. In this new interview series, Nick and I will talk with leaders and decision makers in software development from many different organizations.
Our guests will share their experiences and what went into their decision-making process when innovating and dealing with complex business and technology problems, focusing on modern web technologies and cloud architecture. That's where the cloud in the show's name comes from.
We think that anyone interested in software development should get a lot from the interviews we'll conduct on the show, although they'll probably be of more interest to developers in more senior or architect roles. Before introducing our first guest, we want to tell you that Rocket to the Cloud is presented by Booster. Booster Framework is the most complete solution to build event-driven applications that forms part of the Booster Cloud ecosystem. It is an open source framework that makes use of high-level abstractions and conventions to help you develop advanced event-driven applications focusing on business logic exclusively.
Write your application in terms of commands, events, and entities, and let Booster figure everything out for you, from the boilerplate code or the API design to the optimal cloud architecture. It even knows how to deploy your code in a true serverless experience. Learn more by visiting booster.cloud.
If you've ever worked with the front end with Sass, you probably need to thank this episode's guest.
Or suppose that you had to look at a Wikipedia article on your phone to get some facts straight with some friends at a bar. In that case, you should probably also thank him. Our guest on today's episode is Hampton Lintorn-Catlin, creator of Sass and Haml. He also worked for the Wikimedia Foundation, Moovweb, and until recently, he was VP of Engineering at Rent the Runway, where he decided to leave and co-found a new company called Veue. Now he's the CEO.
Hi, Hampton.
Hi.
Thank you so much for accepting to be the first guest on our show. It's a real honor to have you join us today to talk about your experience, your contributions to software development.
Super excited to be here. Yeah, I'm excited. Premiere episode. Is this a pilot? Are we is the network going to pick us up?
Hopefully. So let's cross our fingers. Let's do our best job. So let's start out by talking a little bit about what are probably your most famous of your contributions, which are Sass and Haml. I guess my first question would be do you have a vision on what a style sheet and templating language should be like, or were they just like an answer to the issues and the problems you were having with CSS and ERB back in the day? This was 2006-ish.
Yeah, it was last Saturday was Sass's 14-year anniversary. So if it was a child, it'd be well into its teenage years. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a lot to say there, to be honest. Haml came first, and I had actually been out of work. I dropped out of college and was trying my best to get a job, and I finally got a job working at this small development firm, and they gave me a chance. So I really appreciated that. And I just working with the teams at the time, semantic HTML was the thing. So this was when I first started in the late 90s in high school, table design, and that's how we built websites. That was the only option. You had to have two versions of the HTML, one for Netscape and one for IE. And then sort of there was this next phase of let's use classes to power how we do things. And so, Haml actually I was working with some people on the team who wouldn't, they didn't seem willing to structure their HTML in a way that was logical or semantic. So Haml was actually sort of my way of organizing my thoughts around what good semantic HTML looks like, and was primarily kind of inspired by YAML. People ask if Haml is named after myself, but it was actually definitely more YAML, though it is funny that it had my started my name in it. And then, so I mean, when it says, when you ask the question is there an opinion in Haml about how you should do things? The answer is yes. In its design, purposely the % sign is meant to be difficult to type, because it's as far away on a US keyboard as you can. And the top row, you have to go hit the digit 5 plus shift. And at the time, the advice was use divs for almost everything. So we made it easier with the period and CSS like syntax to write that. And then, Sass was definitely a spin-off, but has very different design philosophy to it. The initial version was a little more Haml-like in style, but at this point, I mean, my gosh, it has by far a life of its own. It is crazy what's happened with Sass. But that was actually that was very simple. I was working with great front-end developers who were, at the time, there wasn't even like bundling wasn't a thing. Like minifying was just kind of the cutting edge that you had. And so they'd write these giant files with repeating selectors everywhere, and find and replace was the only way they could make changes. So that was actually much more of a direct practical thing, where Haml was much more like trying to express an opinion around how you should structure your HTML.
So yeah, you were saying that they are already 14 years old. So that's a lot of time. And I'm super curious about this. And are you still like really involved with both projects or not? And
well, so to be clear, so Sass, Natalie Weizenbaum she was there from the first ideations. I pitched her on the idea, and she had been a great Haml contributor and had rewritten most of the code inside Haml at that point. This was, 14 years ago. And she ended up writing pretty much the entire Sass implementation from the whole thing has actually been her thing. And she's the one who's been leading the language for most of its life at this point. I mean, 14 years, I probably did 5 years of actual hands-on work on the project, and just done a lot of different things since then. But whether or not it's still involved, it's, with Sass, it's complicated. It's so big at this point, that there's just a lot of people involved. I'm still part of the kind of core team, but more from a honorarian promotional standpoint than anything else. And with Haml, funny enough, you ask that, I in this most recent company that I'm a CEO of right now, we're back to using Ruby. I hadn't really used Ruby in years, and so I have readopted Haml, and we are now in active development again. It'd been kind of on the wayside for a while, so trying to take it and breathe some life into a little more modern take and some changes to it that I think are going to make it fit the next phase of web development. So on Haml, the answer is a solid yes, because somebody needed to do it. So.
And are you satisfied with the direction, especially that Sass has taken now, that is basically like outgrown, what you probably started out with?
Yeah. Oh, I cannot say enough how, Sass would not, if Sass had just been something I'd done, it would have been a weird idea that most likely would have inspired some other languages. Because that's, both Sass and Haml have very unique, I tend to come up with things other people don't think of. But it would be a fun footnote in history that whatever was actually popular was originally done by, this original project called Sass. Natalie and her efforts, the language design and the maturation, she's taken a very strong philosophy that we only add things that are super well thought through. So, I think the most notorious thing is that for years, people wanted an include once, that would basically import once, sorry, that would ensure that somebody else in your giant tree of Sass files didn't re-import a thing you'd already imported and then just duplicate it. Because we gave no guarantees that would happen. And Sass, the original design is, it's every time you do an import with a Sass file, it literally just is like copy and pasting the file into that position. It's a very basic sort of way to bundle everything up together. So Natalie spent years thinking through how we should actually deal with importing and including content. And so what it ended up being with is a new module system that is really, really solid. I actually had, I mostly do tech leadership, so I hadn't been an active coder for a long time. But with this newest project, we started using the newest Dart version of Sass, and the module system is fantastic. it is great. It's like not everybody's used it. It's not really talked about a ton out there, but it is super crazy solid, and I had nothing to do with it, and it is all Natalie, and I recommend everybody go out there, and if you are not using the latest build of Dart Sass, then you definitely should, and check out the module system, because yes, I am super crazy thrilled with the design choices. Much better than what I would have done.
Let me backtrack a bit. You talked about how back in the day you had at the most like minifying JavaScript and CSS files. So what are your thoughts on the way that front-end development has, evolved over the years?
Oh yeah, back totally. Back then, JavaScript was the thing you avoided writing at all costs, and it wasn't compatible with anything. And yeah, I mean, our front-end engineers were just writing hand coding CSS. I mean, that's what 2005, 2006. That's what happened. I mean, I don't think I need to explain how things are today. It's very different. I think there's a couple trends that I see coming that are really unique, which one is that sort of the move towards React and single page applications that are sort of the design of those Vue and React are like, generally it's like, hey, browser, don't do what you do. Like we're in charge here. Like just kind of, I'm going to replace you with a node. We'll figure out rendering. We're in charge. Like, even like we're going to write our CSS and styles in JavaScript. Like just please stop being the browser for now and let us take over. And, I think those came out of a sense that we couldn't trust what browsers were doing, and that like it was important to be able to control them and make it more testable. So I don't think those were bad trends, but I think what's really interesting, I see the newest crop of frameworks are much more embedded in the browser. So, I mean, everything, obviously we can talk about web components, but like, JavaScript is good these days. It's changed from a language that's probably got some terrible design decisions to it to just some real, it's maybe like Sass, like really great people have been spending a lot of time thinking about every single aspect. And the browser is now bringing so much with it. I mean, like even this interview right now, right? We are using an application that's a web app. So we're all looking at our web browsers, and we've got video, we've got interconnection, it's doing the recording, it's doing the uploading, and all of that is just stuff that the, W3C and browser vendors have been slowly in the background just adding more and more awesomeness to that web environment. And, I think more and more we're going to see people realizing that the browser itself actually has an awful lot of great things built in, which then leads me to sort of the second part, which, one, there's the native browser environment, but the other one is, being able to actually use sort of JavaScript modules instead of using something like Webpack. So, Webpack sort of is the final winner for whatever reason in the race towards how do we bundle all this content or, this CSS and JavaScript together to get it to a browser. But, I think as it's now kind of gotten dominance for, once again, whatever reason, it's incredibly hard to set up. The browser, I saw some stat the other day, like 98.5% of browsers now support ES6 style imports, which means you can just use the reason why we bundled is because we didn't want to have too many HTTP requests. So if you do the imports, then you'd have your own browser JavaScript fetching tons of little files, which is terribly inefficient unless you have something like HTTP2 in place that allows multiple, one single connection to push content down and grab a lot of little files really quickly. And I think the combination of HTTP2 plus the sort of ES6 style modules, I don't think we're going to need Webpack anymore. Like, I think there are ways. There's a project called Snowpack that is kind of trying to give the minimal build environment for just letting the browser do all the things that we've been doing in local development. Like we all pretend like import works when we're writing JavaScript now. And then we knew that all just got thrown away and sorted out by Webpack. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes. But I think the whole thing's about to flip on its head. And I don't think we'll need to bundle.
Yeah, and the funny part is that all these tools, they're like one tool fixes a problem, then another tool appears trying to fix more problems that and the one underneath that one is generating, and so on and so on. So there's this like whole like catalog of open source tools that are fixing the problems that each other generate, and now there are more and more and more. And given that now, like you've been like really engaged with the open source communities, like have do you have any special tips or tricks for people that are starting to creating their tools and their open source communities, etc.?
I have, yeah, that's interesting. So I think, well, number one, on the tools creating other problems, I think that's actually, I mean, it's incredibly right, but that is an essential nature of technology. Even when you think of technology as a hand tool for farming, well, once you start getting a hand tool for farming, now I can farm more things. Oh crap, we need more water. Okay, how do I get water? Okay, we'll do some basic irrigation. Wait, that's not enough water. Okay, now I need a pump. Okay, we should do some sort of pumps. And then, oh no, now I need drinking water. That just totally messed up. That has been a continuous thing, and I just think it's essential to pretty much all of human existence, using a broad sense of technology. Now, but sorry, you're incredibly right. Yes, each one of these things, it just makes another problem. As far as starting out on open source, I mean, I think my main advice there applies to, well, gosh, I'm going to do it again, technology in general. So, I think when people are starting out, there tends to be an assumption that everything is how it is for a reason. And that is essentially true, that things are how they are for a reason. But a lot of people take too long to trust their own instincts. And I think what's interesting about open source is that, you have an ability to kind of directly be involved in the technology economy. Like if I go build a new tool to help with ES6 imports, I have, made a change in the industry. Now, maybe nobody will use it. Maybe everybody will use it. But anytime you do this, you need to come in questioning how things are. I think that's the fundamental thing. It doesn't mean be ignorant to why they are how they are, right? So for instance, we talk about Webpack, I might tease them about their configuration files, but hey, it's that way for a reason, right? And it won out against quote unquote simpler options for reasons I maybe don't fully understand. But that doesn't also mean that, you should ignore new opportunities or question things and how they are. And I think that's, I think anytime you're doing a new project, which is what I specialize in, to be honest. So I have been a maintainer of a lot of different things, but, the main thing I focus on is where are those opportunities, and where are the things that nobody else has thought of, to come in with an open mind to questioning the things around you. And I think that's the way you make a real step change in thinking. It also comes with a lot of problems because sometimes when you're ahead of everybody, you mostly confuse people. I remember when I first, we came up with Sass, people were so confused by it because there wasn't a model for it. So what people were thinking it was, and I just remember spending all my initial time with Sass explaining this, they thought it was a way to do dynamic templates. So if you wanted the user to be able to select the background color, the only way they could view CSS or why you'd want quote unquote dynamic or is it, oh, it's so you can pick your own font as a user. Because they were thinking of it like JavaScript or something. And the idea that it was because there were no preprocessors on the web. So the idea that what Babel does, I'll write this one language, it'll turn into another, was something that was hard to even wrap your head around. And so, at first it makes you feel a little bit like a crazy person because I'm like, wait, what? Well, wait, they don't even understand. Oh gosh, is this a terrible idea? And I just it might be a terrible idea, but go build it anyway and find out if it is. That's my advice. There you go. That was the open source advice. Come in and just because somebody says they don't understand it doesn't mean it's not a good idea.
Related to that, we've been working with trying to adopt paradigms like event sourcing and serverless and that kind of stuff. So what attitude should developers have towards adopting, these sorts of things, how to look at the pros and cons,
Yeah, I mean, adopting is very different than creating. And that is so my career as a tech leader, it's a to adopt is a very complicated set of decisions. And that is different than should it exist, right? Because like day one Sass, right? So did it make sense for like IBM to use it? No. It was in Ruby. It was a subproject of Haml. Like it really had a niche audience. Syntax was a little bizarre and it took like quite a while for that to like be something that you just drop into every language. We're actually on our 4th implementation. 4. That takes a while. Now, asking about event sourcing and some of the serverless things, I do think, this is going to be my hot take. Serverless itself is just a bit of a marketing phrase that I think is interesting. And there's some real technologies behind it, like functional, microservice design or service design. But I do feel like that one's gotten so co-opted at this point that I like try to avoid it.
Yeah, it's become like a dirty buzzword.
Well, like serverless counts if I'm a static website that has no backend, that's serverless. And then if I'm actually, a giant set of like event sourcing is serverless, but it's on a server and it's all very complicated. Anyhow, look, event sourcing is an incredibly powerful tool for distributed systems. And I think you're alluding to the Booster project. I think, it has been out of reach for any normal programmer to build stuff with event sourcing. Like it's been so complicated to manage the infrastructure and the design. So I am definitely on the Booster Discord and watching the development closely. But, complicated wise, like I just started, a new company and, I chose a really old tool that doesn't have any of the advantages of event sourcing. Is that because event sourcing isn't much more scalable and something that is much more logical and probably the next phase of development? No, it's like practical, stupid reasons. Like I just went more familiar with one, right? And like I think that's where the adoption thing is really complicated, and it takes longer than people like to say for these things to become where. Well, actually, it's those. I don't know if people. This could be business nerdy, but like Gardner and some of those Magic Quadrant, enterprise like IT things, they use the whole adoption curve of growing hype, mainstream usage. Like that's definitely that stuff is real, and you end up with the long tail of everybody using it. And I don't know if that's. I have so much I could ramble about all of these subjects, to be honest, that woe any podcast that tries to bring me on for only an hour.
Yeah, don't worry. So getting back to open source, so you mentioned a couple of them during just a while ago. So what are in your opinion, the best ones that are out there, the one that you would, vouch for? Anything that has impressed you as of recently?
Yeah, I will, with this. Okay, well, there's a couple things. So for adoption, my number one rule for if I choose to use a technology or go learn it is I need to have at least 3 people I know say they've successfully used it and preferred it. Like that is when I go invest. So like I start seeing tweets and somebody will mention a technology and, I just take, okay, cool. And then I see a second one. Then by the time there's a third one, I'm like, all right, time to go really buckle into this thing. But yeah, ones that have recently been hitting me is actually it's Stimulus.js, which is it's by DHH from the creator of Rails, and Stimulus is a hyper minimalist JavaScript framework where basically all you're trying to do is use sort of HTML5 data attributes to connect controllers to elements on the page. And so the idea is there's literally data, there's connections, and there's actions. And it's like super minimal. I think they brag the framework's, like 10K or something, like super, whatever. But it's like super minimal. And, it's funny, I'm impressed by it. I think, but it's also like, DHH is a guy who has his very strongly held opinions. And, I like both in the best way it gives him his superpowers, but it's also a little bit the weakness, because it is a little bit like you woke up, from like a 10-year freeze. Oh my God, he's going to hear this and be so bad. But like, it's like for like 10 years, like you're a time traveler, and then you're like, there's ES6 now. I guess this is how I should build it. Cause I think they went straight from, using jQuery to like, this is the first time that, that sort of ecosystem's really gotten into anything like a framework. But that being said, as much as I just insulted it, it's actually pretty good. And I think what it's been interesting to me is how much I've been able, like, I haven't missed React. I haven't been like, oh, I can't build this, or this is too complicated, or this isn't testable. Like, it's actually been pretty straightforward to use. And I think I've actually really liked that. And I like that it also, as I mentioned earlier, it puts you in the browser environment. Like you can inside a controller say document.body, and like that isn't forbidden. Like, you are in the browser, like, welcome to the browser. Like, and I think that's just, it's almost like shocking. It feels so horrible. Like, as somebody who's been doing React for a while, or similar language, like, to talk to the DOM, like, are you crazy? And this is like, no, you're in the DOM. And we're kind of these multiple controllers. They're sort of like web components, sort of think of it that way a little bit. And, I had one that was doing an action, and I needed the other controller to find out about it. And in my brain, I start designing like, okay, well, I need a subscription thing, or maybe like I'll go pull in MobX now, or I'll like, maybe I need a whole like data storage layer. And then somebody was just like, wait, do like add event listener and then just emit an event on the document. And I'm like, you can just like send, like, just add event listener. It's like literally just the built-in thing, and you make a custom event type. And then this is just in the browser, and it's super fast. And like, I don't need to simulate a layer on top of it. Like, it's there. You just listen for events on your app. Like, I don't know. That was a mind-blowing moment for me, because I thought, like, am I allowed to be doing this? Like, I felt like teacher was going to come yell at me for using event listeners in the browser where they have implemented a really good system of event listening. Like, it's so strange. But what is old becomes new, and what is new becomes old.
Okay, so we talked a lot about Sass and Haml. So now I want to ask you a bit about mobile Wikipedia. How would you say that the mobile web development ecosystem, or the environment, or has it changed over the years? Because I remember back in the day, in 2008, the iPhone was only like a year old. If you can elaborate on what you did on mobile Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's I don't get to talk about this one much, so I'm pretty excited because it's pretty fun. So the way, I mean, gosh, it's such a crazy story, because like I ended up building, when the App Store first came out, I built it as a native app, but I did it with a web layer, because my initial idea was to take the wiki markup and then actually build a native like view for it. And at the time, I mean, I can tell you iOS was not anywhere near being able to do that. And it would be a little easier today. And also the wiki markup was very clearly the only way you could actually interpret wiki markup is with a full Wikimedia installation. So you actually have to ask the server for its HTML. It's the only way for it to get interpreted correctly, which, is a bit of tech debt, but like, gosh, you can't say they aren't successful. Like, it's holding up just fine. So we ended up building basically a proxy layer that would take the HTML and then strip away all the details. Now, what's also interesting is that the arguments I was having with people at the time, where the Wikimedia Foundation, they said you have to support really slow network connections, and you have to support older devices, because they were thinking about accessibility sort of around the globe, and that at the time very few sites actually very few people actually had iPhones. And so I remember we had a big debate about, like, could I even use HTML for the site? Because at the time, WAP was the standard for web things, which people don't even remember WAP, but it was a bizarre XML related markup for non-smartphones. And my argument was, look, yes, we need to minimize the site, make it simpler, but like, build for the future. Like, there are going to be more and more people with smartphones. And yes, we don't want to count out, people who need access to information. But like, we should put images on this thing because there are going to be more and more people with smartphones. And, it ended up being right. Like, and that's why we were actually one of the earliest sort of mobile websites with, I think Twitter and Google were pretty much the only other ones that had decent mobile coverage at the time. Like, you couldn't really use, this was, if you remember, like Steve Jobs, when he announced the iPhone, he said, hey, look, when you use the New York Times, it's the full front page, pinch and zoom to be able to look at it. He was proposing that there shouldn't be even a mobile friendly New York Times app. Like, he was saying, just show the whole page and zoom in. So that was like, to have a mobile website was a bit controversial. Even once again, a mobile kind of native app was something new. And so I ended up building that. It was crazy. A very simplified version of the site, designed by me. So sorry for everybody for years. But we actually ran the whole thing with smart caching on only 3 servers. It ended up getting, I think 3 million visitors a day or something, which was just nuts. And then, fun fact, the servers, Wikipedia itself, during mostly North America, but Europe too, the workday is the time when Wikipedia gets the most traffic. So it's when people tend to be at their desktops. When we added in the mobile site, the clear peaks, there was a transition when both Europe and North America went into like happy hour on Fridays and Saturdays. So pretty much you would see a bump of Europe, everybody arguing about something in a bar and looking it up on their phone. I'm sure people listening to this have loaded Wikipedia at a bar with friends being like, "No, look, you're wrong." So those are the peaks. And it was funny. The traffic would go down on main Wikipedia at the same times, but you could see the humps exactly between like 5 to 7 p.m. And with Europe and North America. And I ended up joining a company called Moovweb, where we basically built a commercialized version of what I had built at Wikimedia, and ended up powering like half the e-commerce sites like Walmart and Macy's and all sorts of other things, which was just what a different, from open source to like the biggest e-com enterprise companies ever. So and today, where are we at? iOS Safari is the bane of all mobile development right now. Like, there are so many hacks in that, and it remains the one of the most valuable target devices, but it doesn't, like, they clearly want you writing native apps and getting their 30%. So it is in Apple's best interest to not fix everything in that browser. So there are lots of APIs that are just not supported. And if anybody here has ever tried to make the keyboard work correctly and slide up nicely on a mobile web device, you have seen the face of the devil. Because I could get into the technical details. There's a fun history on why that keyboard is so gnarly. But I think we're going to have to force, through antitrust or something else, Apple to finally address that. And I don't think until it happens, mobile web isn't going to be what it could be, which sucks. So we should fix that. SEC, can you hear me? Or European Union? Come on, EU. Get on it.
By the way, you were mentioning right now Moovweb, and like you were commercializing the part that made mobile Wikipedia fast, and it's actually one of the main selling points of the company. Like, was your involvement with Moovweb directly tied or a consequence of your experience? Like what was what was your experience there?
Yeah, the experience, that was my first time in like true company leadership. So that's a whole subsection. 100%. It was a direct tie on. I was doing Wikipedia. It was a very rewarding job. But, my key insight with Wikipedia was that if the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a technical, much beloved by nerds, easy to recruit company, struggles with the technical debt to be able to deliver compelling, and this is more at the time than today, to be honest. And Moovweb themselves as a company has like a kind of different product now. But if Wikimedia couldn't do it, then what on earth were like the majority of other companies in the world going to do? At least for a while. Like, I think every like things we saw once, in that job over and over again were big companies saying, oh, we'll just rewrite our platform. Which for anybody who's been in the industry a while, that's like, good luck. Like, rewrites are incredibly difficult, especially for very large businesses that are not technical businesses. Like, but like Macy's, they're a great company, but like, that's not a tech company. And like, when they need to do a full replatform off some sort of giant IBM product, once again, if Wikimedia struggled, I realized other companies would. And so Ajay Kapoor, the CEO of Moovweb, called me up. It was just like, hey, so he's like, I just signed a major retailer for like $1 million contract, but I don't really know if our platform's up to spec right now. Do you want to come build one for me? And I was like, yes, I do. Let's go do this. So that was a crazy ride. It was also my first time in like more of a sort of true senior leadership position where I wasn't, coding day to day or sort of being more hands-on. And, that has been the majority of my career since then. I'm usually more hands-on early in a project and then get less and less and less. And that's a pattern pretty much every single project I'm bringing up. Well, it either dies or somebody else takes it on for its later parts.
So Hampton, you spent quite a bit of time working at Moovweb. From what I've seen, a big part of it is its CDN, but it's not just that. It's just also it's like a complete platform for developing and deploying front-end applications. So why was the decision taken to, focus on the front end and not the full stack?
So when I left, our product was a CDN that could manipulate the responses generally in HTML from some other origin. The company, I've been gone for 8 years. So they've actually, they have turned their product to something much more sophisticated than what it was when I left. So honestly, the staying out of the front end or only remaining there is definitely not. I didn't really have a say on that one. But no, they have turned it into. They kind of took the fact that we were roughly a CDN that was being on the edge and interpreting results, and then they've really crafted into a product that is specialized in how to piece by piece convert your front end to something much more modern, which it's that customer base which honestly, like, every company struggles to fully replace stuff. And I think, what Ajay's been really great at doing is understanding the needs of big company clients that are struggling to do a rebuild and then pulling that into, something that can actually help them get results.
Also, Moovweb, you recently mentioned that it was your first true senior leadership role. If you could talk a bit about how you like to build teams, what do you look for in the different players in your team, that kind of stuff. If you can elaborate on that.
Yeah. I can elaborate forever on that. I ended up getting into leadership mostly because the thought that I had of like, how do I say this? Sorry. I got into leadership because I just thought, well, if they can do it, like, I can do a better job at this than X person. I know it's really horrifyingly mean, but I just I just kind of looked at what I valued and who I trusted to help make sure the team was successful. And I just felt like I would just volunteer and step into that position and take that. And I think, a lot of engineers try that, and a lot of engineers, and it's nothing bad, but they don't succeed at that. I am a secret introvert. I am gregarious and outgoing, but I am a teenager. I was a teenager who didn't go out on Friday nights, and I played with my computer until I got it working. Like, I'm a nerd, right? Like, silence is something I really enjoy. And to make the decision to step into leadership, I think the thing that makes somebody successful or not, or that transition, is whether or not you can value that you helped somebody else succeed. So, as an engineer, I can write 1,000 lines of code and think, wow, that was very satisfying. I did a great job. I'm happy with myself today. But, if I have nothing but meetings all day and the team got 1,000 lines of code done or 2,000, but, maybe it's a lot more people and maybe, like it's indirect. You have to kind of like in your mind be able to take enjoyment from just that as a group you succeeded. And it's a level of indirection that is difficult for somebody who, or I think for any engineer who is used to just writing code, and like we like to see concrete results. It's much easier to say like, aha, today I didn't have this, and tomorrow I will, or like having an A to B. Where in leadership, I mean, look, also in leadership, you never know if you've done a good job. Like that is a truth of leadership that nobody likes to talk about. You have no idea if what you did was good or not. And that is, we're also people who we got into this career, we got yelled at by a compiler over and over again when we were learning to code. And it said, wrong, wrong, and then it said right. And you were like, yes. Like in leadership, I mean, you can look back and like, honestly, you have more questions than you have answers. Like, should we have done that? I don't know. And it is a very unnerving thing for analytical people, because unknowns for analytical people are, well, we try to get rid of them, to be honest. Like that's our whole job, is to like take those unknowns and solve them. So I think like that's whenever somebody's talking about going into leadership or they're interested in it, it's like, I always say like, have a real gut check on whether or not you're okay with, right, first of all, never knowing exactly if that was right or not. And then also, being able to take the enjoyment in the success that does happen, and just focus on trying to help. Because all you can do is say, I'm going to try to make it better than if I wasn't involved. And like, that's really that is the energy that you get to take from the job. And it's tough. Like, people don't talk about that is tough, to remain motivated, to keep focused, to, it's just like, and this is where people, I think, burn out of it. And I happen to find that I just take so much joy in the customer or the impact. Like I don't like, I care about our impact to the world. So it's fine with me to not write the code myself. I just care about our customers or users happy from an open source project too. That's developers, but like, are they having success with what we've built? And then, to learn to trust the team to make decisions on their own, and me just to be there to do the best that I can to help them make those good decisions. Yeah. So that's my rant about, and then you said, what makes a successful team? That was the other part of the question. I really believe in, there's a great book called The Culture Code, which I really recommend. And it's all about, one of the things that makes teams successful or not is a diversity of thought and a culture where failure is okay. Like well-meaning failure, obviously. But like, and the way you get to that in my book is through vulnerability. So, even in this interview, like I am happy to admit that sometimes it's tough to be a leader. Like sometimes I'm not sure of everything. I can't see the future perfectly. And I think when you can admit, especially to a more junior person or somebody who hasn't had as much success, like that it's tough, and like we're all people and we're all doing the best we can, that gives them the opportunity to feel like they're not losing their mind, that they're good enough, that it gives them the confidence to say like, well, if he feels that way, then I do. And not just me, but like, I think that's a culture that I really like to build, is we should all be very open to the things that we're good at and the things we're not good at. And like, that's why having a team of different, mental models, like sometimes you need somebody on the team who is an amazing algorithm solver. Sometimes you need a person who does pixel perfect design. Sometimes you need the person who writes really good tickets. Like that is a valuable team member, and not just as a product person. I mean, like an engineer who maybe doesn't write as much code, but will go through and like clarify a lot of tickets for a lot of other people. And then, the point is just like this, there isn't, and this is why also I hate tech interviews. I think they're the worst, because really any tech interview, almost any approach, is typically looking for a particular set of attributes And in my book, the only ones that really matter are, that vulnerability and decency and a curiosity and a commitment to like the team. Honestly, I just really, studies have borne this out over and over again. Almost all types of interviews are barely better than random. Actually, I think I saw some studies that tech interviews are worse than random at choosing successful team members, because you end up optimizing for things that are not necessary. If I say you should be able, every engineer should be able to sort an array this way. The truth is, like, I don't need a lot of engineers to sort an array a particular way. Like, it depends. You end up with like those tests like foobar, or was it foo? Yeah, is it foobar? Fizzbuzz, foobar. Yeah, Fizzbuzz that are like, I guess, do you know what a variable is? Is what you're trying to like, or an if statement, like, understand a switch. But I mean, I honestly, if I hired somebody and then, in the US, at least you get 60 days to make a decision about them. If you really started and I realized you just could not code, like, that is your first and last week on the job, like, early on. The things that I've seen people, by the way, I have never seen that in my career. I've never seen somebody trick. I'm sure it's happened, but I have never seen that you hire somebody and then realize when you thought they could code and they said they could code that they just could not code. Now, I've heard a million people with their interview anecdotes say, thank God we didn't hire that person. They couldn't even code. But 6 weeks later, you look on their LinkedIn and they work at Google now as an engineer. And you're like, oh, wait, could they not code, or should we just totally screw up that interview? So look, and I know that's not a very happy story to say, like, I think you need diverse teams and I think interviews are as good as random. But, I also think an interview is a really great way to start out with the right foot of like, I trust you and let's build I'm going to hire you. And that's a step of trust on my side. And like, we're going to build that together through vulnerability, through taking a chance. And I really think that's a much better way to build teams than, some sort of like shibboleth that you have to be able to pass around compression algorithms or something.
And what about like third-party contractors? Like, did you have the opportunity to hire them to build the team, stuff like that?
I did work with this one firm called the Agile Monkeys that were amazing. I've been an external party. Like, that's how I started. I cut my teeth. My first job was, we would come in and build things for people with ideas, and a lot of times I had to come into old code bases and try to like fix them. I absolutely, and honestly, like, I still use external third parties, but honestly, I don't. When working with any sort of external party, what I want is shared ownership. I don't like the term external third party, because there certainly are ways of working where, like, the one thing I won't do is when they're like, here's the project manager, please give us your requirements. There are certain projects that you can maybe pull that off with, but they're very limited, one-time, one-off kind of projects. Like, to me, when I use this applies equally to me to third party as internal employees. Like, I just really, even like, when you're working together, you should be a team, and like, that is the number one goal. And somebody should be brought in as partners, and it needs to have shared vulnerability. I mean, literally, I use the same mental model when I'm working with people who are not legally employees as I do with people who are contractors, who are companies. The number one way that I've turned down companies is when like, I'll put up a thing on Upwork or something, like, not that, just that, something like that, or I need help with something, and like, if a firm's like, oh, first talk to our product manager, like, is the interview, but then later, if like, you basically don't get to talk to the people who are actually doing the work. And like, that's like, that to me is such a red flag, because just, that's not, either they don't trust their person to be good enough for us to talk, or just there's something really weird going on. It's like, look, my opinion is like, especially if you are building a team, and I guess that's also different, right? There's totally non-technical companies and projects, but I think what I'm referring to is if you have a team or you want to augment a team or you want to extend a team or build a team, I think you need to treat everybody as a team member, and that's the only way to build really great stuff.
And like talking about like externalizing stuff, like rather than externalizing to third-party contractors, like what's your experience with using and building projects by using third-party services? Like what are your best and worst experience related to that?
Like where they had full responsibility to execute the thing, like end to end.
Yeah, or more rather like software as a service models where you just say, okay, I'm not gonna build authentication. I'm just gonna use this product and that's it. Like, what's your experience with using third-party services? Like, do you have an experience that went well or then horribly bad?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly build stuff myself, or have my teams do it. And I think definitely infrastructure items like SMS or Stripe or payments or something like that, those can be really useful as an external service. But I tend to say anything that's business logic or is unique to your business, you should build yourself. Now, that being said, on the negative side, I there's an app called Okta that people have probably used, it's a really fantastic enterprise access control layer. So if you want to hire a new employee, give them access to Google Docs or to, your Twilio account or whatever, Okta's great at that. There is I have a friend at a major US airline who they signed Okta to power their login for consumers. And it's now like 3 years into that project because that's not what it was built for. But, this is where like things, if they can go wrong, if I probably should have said Okta to be honest, but at least, but like if you go, I need authentication and I don't really know what authentication is. And I don't exactly 100% know why our business needs authentication. And then you say, who's the best authentication company? Okta very well might be a good answer to that because they are actually a really great solution for employee access controls, but they're not a consumer company, and so like it's one of those things. Like if you have to really understand like why are you doing this, and I just will always chuckle. I'm waiting for maybe people will find out at some point if a major US airline all of a sudden you have an Okta login as your consumer login. But yeah, I think just like understanding why you're building it, understanding what you need it for. Nobody needs to invent everything themselves, but you could really get in trouble if you don't understand the nature of what you're trying to solve. Like that's your first thing to figure out.
So Moovweb was your first major senior leadership role. I want to talk a little bit about Rent the Runway, where you were director of engineering. You then became the VP of engineering. So if you can tell us about RTR and your experience there.
Yeah, RTR. I mean, I had such a fantastic time at RTR, and I have to say, like, Jen Hyman, CEO of Rent the Runway and founder, is an advisor to my current company. So I definitely left, with a lot of, and my husband still works there. So, lots of really great feelings about that. And I mean, what a crazy ride. That's going to be my answer because, over my time there was just, I had to learn so much stuff about where the product fit in. It's funny. The size of the team, wasn't, any larger than I'd kind of had before. But what's so interesting about what Rent the Runway does, if people aren't familiar with the business, definitely look it up. I find a lot of engineers are not super aware since it's mostly women's, clothing. And unfortunately, there's not enough women in engineering. And they're only in the US, so that also sort of limits it. But, it is a reverse logistics operation that is, rents out clothes on repeat and then returns them to the customer. And I think what was so challenging and interesting was that every single thing that we changed in engineering had such a physical impact on the product that are the clothes and how they were all perceived by the customer, delivered to the customer, returned by the customer, tracked by our analytics, purchased. Like the buying department's a huge department that buys, millions and hundreds of millions, I think was the last year of clothes. And like, this has like serious physical real world impacts. Like you pick a certain dye in the clothes and that changes how it bleeds into another thing. Or, you do a marketing email on one thing and all of a sudden you'll sell out of this one type of clothes. And then, I remember there was a issue we had where, we had bought a lot of cotton and we hadn't really bought a lot of cotton because we were going with less formal things. And when summer came around, all of a sudden the cottons got way more popular really quick. The weather turned warm and then all this stuff left. And as soon as it started coming back, we realized cotton, you can't steam. Like you actually need to iron or use a press. So we just hadn't had that many pressing stations. And by the way, each one of those pressing stations has a digital terminal that's tracking things. And we had a huge backlog of stuff that all needed to get pressed. And that was like the relationship between like literally a promotional email to what we had purchased to the management software we'd never had a backlog like that too. So we had to go build new technology to like track and prioritize the backlog, which actually ended up building a whole new IoT system to sort of start tracking that inventory and how you dealt with it. And it was like at a scale that, was kind of off the charts every time. And that's just, I think what's so interesting about that business and just kept me so interested for so long was that, look, the engineering problems are straightforward, honestly. Like, I think there's very few companies in the entire world that have truly unique engineering things themselves. I think what starts to get really interesting the further in your career you get is when you start dealing with having to understand not just the code, but how the code impacts the world around it. Which, it's all like, I think there's a point of software engineering seniority where you can start to think like a system, not just in like, and, microservices have sort of driven this faster than maybe some people can keep up with it. But like you make a change to one service and it can have impacts that are, the queues get delayed, which backs up another one, which means another process starts failing. And like, you have to start thinking 3D almost about how all this is going on. And then when you add to that there's this sort of physical layer and a very direct like relationship to the physical world, it's just fascinating and like just never, honestly, I still get excited about it. I still love to hear about the new projects going on there. But I think for me, it was much less the core technology issues and much more like, okay, how does that express itself?
Are they the biggest challenges that you faced as an engineer? How to apply technology to solving real world problems?
Yeah, I maybe like, so there's certainly obviously the physical aspects, but I think when you get into a larger organization and a more complicated business, to be a senior leader, to be driving the work and how things are organized and how problems are thought about, because right, as a leader, really what you're even doing is just setting the context for success, right? So if a team needs to know what I think doing well is, right? It's like, what are they trying to drive towards? Why are they working? What are they working on? And like in a small organization, you can directly set the exact agenda for every single team because maybe you have one or two teams. In a large organization, you have to much more set the direction and then trust other people to drive that. So I would say, just as much as like the warehouse was the thing that drove a lot of decisions, like the fact there was very complicated financials that required, auditable results, like that you have to keep all that sort of thing in mind. That I think applies to almost every business. And then the human aspects, right? Like you have to think about, like let's say I have a team working on some marketing things, right? Like I need to make sure that team feels the impact of their work. I need to make sure they feel that, they're connected with the customer. I need to make sure they also feel like we're not just giving them too simple of work. Like they need to also have some quote unquote meteor projects and then just a mix of personalities. And like, I just think that's universal. I think Rent the Runway is a little more on the physical was interesting, but I think, any time if you really want to like take your career, especially out of being an IC, but even like honestly, super senior ICs, individual contributors, sorry, like a chief architect needs to keep all those things in their mind. Like they need to understand how the financials of the company work, like, because the designs and modeling you do of the database are going to have impacts there. And that's not something as a smaller organization you spend a lot of time thinking about, but as a really large organization, like that is the job, right? That's what's unique about senior leadership. It's not, do I get my sprint done? It's not even, is the product fun or did we successfully deliver the feature? It's actually like the whole context with which that exists, and then keeping in mind all the different aspects, I think is, honestly, I find it super enjoyable. But it is the job of being crazy senior in technology in every organization, as far as I'm concerned.
And related to like more recent organizations, a couple of months ago, you left Rent the Runway and decided to pursue a totally different venture with Veue. Is that pronounced correctly?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So not to be confused with Vue.js. All we know at the moment is that it's a live stream platform. And can you give us a sneak peek about like what's more about that?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I think, 6 months ago now, I left Rent the Runway because like I had just sort of been feeling that like I had a whole, I'd done startups in the past, smaller ones, but I felt like this idea sort of came to me and my co-founders and like was too big not to pursue. And during kind of the coronavirus outbreak, like so many people are stuck at home and feeling disconnected from each other that I really felt like the existing live streaming platforms didn't have all the aspects of what I think should exist. And so, we initially started as much more of a sort of like what are called live video commerce companies. So focused on like shopping with people. So like Twitch for shopping was sort of the original idea. And, it's kind of evolved a little bit more just based on our even testing and practicing, where people have really enjoyed live streaming sort of a bunch of different activities. And, honestly, we're at a phase during this conversation where like, we're still developing a lot of even what the company is, because we're definitely in this odd phase where it's like, so we've made this thing. And like, I know I'm being very vague about it, but we've made it. And basically it's you plus some content and live streaming. And it's basically screen sharing plus you. And like in a very sort of free form way. And like I said, we sort of initially were focusing on the shopping aspects, and who knows, that might fully come back as the killer use case for this, which is like looking at e-commerce sites while shopping. But what we sort of it's sort of like emerged that there's just so much more that people want to connect with others about, so many interests out there that people have. So like, one of the ones that for me really has been driving my thinking is like, I can get really fascinated by researching my family's genealogy. It's just something that like I end up writing these stories in my head and like finding newspaper articles about ancestors and like they lived in a certain city, or and I'll start building these stories, and like I can lose like 5 hours just on a Sunday, just like reading stuff I can find on the internet and research I can do. And like, there are other people who would find that really enjoyable to be a part of that and to sort of participate together and do that in sort of a broadcast way. And so, like at this phase, I can't say that that's going to even be a use case anybody does, but we are sort of trying to investigate and come up with totally new ways of interacting with other people. And primarily, I think there's just this trend in the world of being more remote friendly. And not just white collar jobs being more remote friendly, which obviously during coronavirus outbreak of Corona 19, just in case this is in the future and there's Corona 20 or 21. But is that too dark of a joke? But we've had this sort of remote friendliness, but there's also things like Starlink, the Elon Musk project to bring high-speed internet to pretty much all of the rural world at the same time, which is going to have a huge impact, I believe, on how we even build cities and understand where people are. And like, I can see that this drives, people from around the world wanting to connect about the things they're passionate about more and more. I think Twitch is the only company that's done a really good job, and they, obviously they're focused on video games and some other things. So I had to focus on video games with the period on the end of that. But like, I don't know if anybody else has really driven that sort of like, you feel like you're hanging out with a friend and sort of having a conversation, and you're just sort of enjoying time together in something you're interested in. And so, we are in active development, but definitely chasing that feeling of belonging and interest. So we'll see in the future.
So Hampton, at the beginning of the conversation, if I recall correctly, you mentioned that you were for Veue, you're actually using Haml for some of your stuff. So what kind of stuff do you have now in your toolbox to have this different, this whole new experience for live streaming that you're working on with Veue?
So it's a great question, because I'm sort of expressing we brought up adoption a little bit earlier. So anytime you're building a business or a product, especially something new, there's intrinsically, you are going to introduce complexity somewhere, and you have to be really careful about where that is. So you want to maximize the things that are unique and make them more complex and more novel. The things that are not unique, you should minimize and be as predictable as you damn well can. So, for instance, if I'm building a video game system, right? I might want my asset, like the way I build textures, to be just whatever. We'll go use Unity and be as basic as possible. And then whatever it is about that game, you want the gameplay to be the thing that's complicated. You want to spend all your time on the gameplay, just because that's where you're, different. Now, for us, I ended up choosing Rails, Ruby on Rails, which is a technology that I, hadn't used in about 6 years. And I sort of started my career in the Rails world. And that's because, fundamentally, at one level, the product I'm building, it's just a web page. It's when you log in like a user, I just want you to log in like a user. There's nothing, from that perspective, there's nothing unique about it. I've got business logic I need to write. It's pretty much a page. What is unique about it is actually the video aspects, and those have very different characteristics. So sort of the choice to go with a 18-year-old software that is no longer considered cutting edge in a language that is, not growing rapidly, but it is super well thought out. What it does fantastically. If you want a login form and you want to write it yourself, but you want the back end to do that, Rails is so great. It is so mature in so many aspects. But then again, I knew that outside of the video parts, I knew had to be very unique. And I actually knew a lot of that needed to happen in JavaScript and in the browser and in content delivery systems and some of those aspects. So it's sort of for this particular thing, it was all right, minimize the complexity in the areas that you can make predictable, and then focus all your energy on the things that are, the totally unique to the business. And, also it's funny, Rails, as much as it's old, and, Twitter famously back in the days, was built on Rails and then said, you can't scale on Rails. It's funny, Shopify, which is is such a giant company at this point. It's all Rails. GitHub is built in Rails. Twitch is built in Rails. It doesn't scale, but it sure seems to be trying. Now, that being said, we were talking earlier about event sourcing. Event sourcing is, if I was building a notification platform, if I was building Twilio again, right, or a competitor to that, oh my gosh, the number one thing you want to do is have an ultimately distributed, scalable system for handling commands, queues, all those things. Or if I'm starting something at a larger scale, absolutely. Actually, if I was building an MMO, I think I would probably build it with a technology like that, because your real issue is a scalability problem of a certain type. And, I think some of these tools are awesome at that. But, for this particular thing, I was I just want an asset pipeline, and I want some routes, and then a web page, and I want it to render server side. And then it's like, solved problem. Like that is a solved problem.
What are your challenges for yourself and Vue? We're about to end our interview, so if you can, I don't know, give us a glimpse to the future.
Well, we're definitely going to be piloting this. The stuff about ES6 modules. Like this is once again a start where I am assuming everybody's going to be like, we're building for the future. So, most browsers do HTTP2 now by a huge margin and packaging that way. So I am going to continue to focus on building out some of these new, let's say, Web 6.0 features, and really like exploiting the great work that's been done in the browser. I think as a company, like it's really about listening to the customers and trying to build something that's really compelling. And we get this really great advantage to be able to build something entirely new and then just try to connect people together.
Oh, we're definitely going to need that considering how things are going with that damn virus.
Hey, the vaccine just started today, and I'm in the UK right now where they got the vaccine. So hopefully, yeah. I had something else to bring up and I totally forgot it. So sorry. And I know we're way over time.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of interesting things today. It was such a great experience to have you on this podcast, and it was very pleasing to listen to all of this stuff that you've done and you're planning to do. So I think that we can finish this episode for now. So thanks a lot, Hampton.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hampton. Yeah. Whenever you have anything else to show, you're definitely more than welcome to talk to us again, and we can do an entire episode on the different features and the new kind of stuff that we'll be able to experience using the Vue live streaming platform.
I'm ready.
Thank you for watching this episode of Rocket to the Cloud.
So if you like what you saw, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click on the bell icon so you can be notified whenever we publish a new interview with another awesome guest.
Until next time.
Until next time.